I am recording to the cloud as ye have commanded. Okay, good. So I'd like to start with an opening question. Maybe why don't we do the bracha first? And you know what? I would have to summon it up, but hopefully everybody will remember it, and we'll do it together slowly anyway. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asot b'divrei Torah. Amen. Okay, so I'd like to start with an opening question, which is there an event in your life that has had a big impact on you or even defined you that you come back to again and again?
You know, that's a very gendered question, Rich.
Is it a gendered question?
I think so.
Well, why would that be?
You're going to have to unpack
Why?
that for us,
Yeah.
Debbie. Why is that?
Why?
gendered?
Why do you think it's gendered,
Let's think-
Deborah?
Well, let's think
I
about
don't.
it. Let's think about it. Let's think about, well, let's start with the idea of what a momentous or what would be momentous. Oh, by the way, I didn't say sexist.
No, I understand.
No. I'm not asking. No. I'm saying I think it's a very gendered question. What I mean by that is in the answers, I suspect we are going to get very different kinds of momentum, momentous in the answer. That's what I meant by gender. I didn't mean sexist, and I didn't mean this isn't a comparative, better or worse. I just meant that I think that, well, maybe I should wait to hear the answers.
Okay.
But
Well,
I think it has a potential to be. So I will begin by saying perhaps for me, the most momentous experience through my body. And that's where I'm going to say the birth of my children. And then my husband might very well answer that, but it would be, I believe, in a very different way. That's what I meant by gender. So,
Okay.
okay.
So the birth of your children.
So I would
Thank
say,
you.
yeah, that would. Do you want us to say anything more about that, or just the idea of it?
No, wherever it may lead you, that certainly could be a novel of a topic to talk about what it's meant, but you know, we can start with that. Annette, how about you? I saw you raise your hand.
Deborah, your life experience has been very different than mine. I don't have children, and I would say the event in my life, and my brothers would say the same thing, I think I can speak for them even though they're not here, was the death of our father when we were children. And so I do not see this as a gendered question at all. And I think that for my brothers would trump anything else that's happened in their lives.
Could I just?
And it does for me too.
I just wanted to ask, just to put a more of a. I think I came out a little too bluntly. What I meant by that was I would agree that on the face of it appears to be that there would be a similar cause, but I'm wondering, in the telling of our stories of what is so momentous to us, if we don't experience it in some gendered way. And I would just venture to say that daughters' relationships to their parent, to their fathers in particular, may be quite different from your brother's experiences. So I don't mean that it doesn't have import, but
My brothers and I have discussed this a great deal, and the thing that made the biggest, because there were large age differences in my family, the thing that was the most different for us was our ages, not our genders.
Okay, okay.
So I think, Deborah, this may be about the lens through which you see the world and not about the question.
Yeah.
If I may.
At the end of the day, it's a question that is about identity, and
Right.
identity is individual. And as you know, however wise we might try to be, it's hard to transcend our individual
Ourselves.
So
Trying to get out of our own boxes.
Yeah. So it definitely explores what box you're in. Claudia.
going to a Quaker college, because the Quakers adhere to nonviolence and peaceful resistance to violence during the Vietnam War, which has defined me in that I am always going to be aware of the violence that is out there and the need for us to do something, but awareness I can't do it by myself. It's got to be in. And yet I still constantly feel a struggle between helplessness and I should be doing something more. And so I consider myself a Quakerly Jew, and that defines me over and over.
Thank you. It's interesting also to think about the ages that these events are occurring. And in at least two cases, young adulthood, and that you had various siblings experience it at different times. Which college was it, by the way, Claudia?
Earlham College.
Earlham. I was wondering if you were going to say that. I have a dear friend who went to Earlham and speaks about it all the time. So
it's also the college that my daughter went to. It was the last one she was going to go to since her mother had gone there. It couldn't be any good. And anyway, nobody had ever heard of it.
Yeah.
And she was into brand names as a teenager, and it turned out to be the perfect school for her.
Perfect. Thank you. Would anyone else like to share something on the question? Yes, Nomi.
Obviously, it would be becoming a mother, so or a father, I think. But I have to be, besides that, when something happened that you never dreamed could happen in your life. And maybe I was incredibly naive. Obviously I was. And it's been going on and on, particularly within these last 5 years or 6 years, maybe, is the loss of democracy around the world. And I know that sounds like but it brings you right back to the Haggadah. And because it's freedom versus autocracy, to jump ahead, I know that what is set up in its place for the Jewish people, for the Israelites, was not an autocracy. And I've had a lump in my throat for I would call it many years now because it feels like a century. And it's just because it's been ongoing since 2015, 2016. And it really is because I was stupid. Maybe I was naive, or maybe I was stupid. I don't know which, maybe both. I didn't think this could happen here. Or I didn't think it was going to happen in my time or my child's lifetime.
Right.
And that's the most momentous thing that's happened to me.
Okay. Thank you, Nomi, for sharing that. We certainly have gotten an instant dose of relevance from Mr. Putin with regard to this year's Seder, that's for sure. But I know the assault on democracy is much broader than that, and internal. Would anyone else have any thoughts? We totally volunteer. Yes, Nancy.
Losing my husband. Yeah. And many things that have had major impacts on me, but if the word is momentous, that's the most momentous.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Roxanne.
I think it was when I was 7 years old and helped my mother prepare for her first time talking about her experience in the Holocaust as a child. And she practiced her speech with me. So I heard little bits of the story before, but it was the first time I heard the whole story and witnessed her tears as she prepared for it. And I think that really changed everything that happened after in my life. The professional decisions I made, the personal decisions. It was a huge thing.
How much time did you spend helping her prepare?
Oh, probably for the next 5 years.
Mm.
You know, because she evolved she became one of the most popular speakers in the Midwest. And she was very frightened by public speaking. And so we really worked on it. We both went to the Dale Carnegie course together so that we could learn how to do public speaking. And I was kind of her support system. I was the oldest daughter, and I would go with her and, you know, help her up. It was big because she was very raw and vulnerable then. It wasn't as canned in the, you know, later, and she spoke until she was 84, a year before she died. She, you know, she spoke a lot. A play was written about her. She's a book was written, and so it
Roxanne,
evolved. But
what's her name and where in the Midwest?
well, I mean, this started in O'Neill, Nebraska, but she did in Sioux City, Iowa, Rapid City, South Dakota, Omaha, Nebraska, Lincoln,
What's the
Nebraska.
name of the book and what's the name of the play?
It's called Broken Doll.
And
it
her
came,
name?
Oh, I've heard of that.
Yeah, and her name, right?
well, she's passed, but at the end of her life, it was B. Karp. With my father's name was Pappenheimer, so it's B. Pappenheimer.
Any relation to Hannah? Hannah Pappenheimer?
No,
No?
no.
Thank you for sharing that, Roxanne. Very interesting. And I hope I'm not reaching any confidence to say that you came from an interesting family where your mother had a sister who took a very different approach to her experience.
Correct. She
Going through
didn't
the
speak
Holocaust.
about it at all. Yeah. And her children didn't know anything about it. And we grew up with it.
Right. So for another time, but a fascinating story. Thank you for sharing that.
Mhm.
Would anyone else like to share something?
I'll put in my 2 cents.
Thank you.
First of all, for those who were here for the pre-show, that's the crazy appliance on the back of me, in case you were curious. I would say unequivocally the proudest 7 seconds of my life, which happened twice, was being up on the stage at BU, giving each of my daughters their undergraduate diplomas and giving them a big hug. That left a lasting impact on me as a culmination of the child rearing that Roxanne and I did for our 2 little kids who are not little anymore.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful vision. Thank you for that. I'll just share very briefly that for me, it was taking 6 months off when I was a junior in college to become a teacher at an environmental education center. And it kindled for me a lifelong love of both teaching and also the outdoors and in the environment and planting and all of those things. So let's move into Passover and the Haggadah. And so the Haggadah comes from a Hebrew root that means to tell, lahagid. And so it's not just speaking, it's going to the more intentional act of taking words and bringing them into stories to tell who we are, where we came from. And tonight I wanted to give a little background on a few stories that are at the beginning of the Magid, the telling, that set the tone of the Seder. And I think for context, some of this you know that a lot of the Haggadah, most of it is contained in the Talmud. It was already set as a service a long time ago. Good portions of it are in the Mishnah, which was compiled around 200, and the Talmud finished off a lot of the rest of it a few centuries later. There's some parts of it, like Dayenu, that are more recent additions. But much of what you read was codified then and was presumably part of the service of Pesach, on an oral tradition basis before that. So it gives you a sense not only of the antiquity of this that we have been coming back to year after year, but also the mindset of the rabbis who pulled it together, where they are trying to bring to life a defining experience that's triumphant, but they're also doing it in the context of the despair of the destruction of the Second Temple and exile. And so it's kind of a strange mix of feelings at the same time. And no surprise, there's a lot of messianic hope in that document as a result of it. What I'd like to start with is the halachma. All right, can you see that?
Yes.
All right. So at the very beginning of the Magid, we start with halachma anya, and just to read, this is the bread of destitution. People usually have a Haggadah that says affliction that our ancestors ate in the land of Egypt. Anyone who's famished should come and eat. Anyone who is in need should come and partake of the Pesach sacrifice. Now we are here. Next year, we will be in the land of Israel. This year, we are slaves. Next year, we will be free people. And the Hebrew or foreign language, shall I say, halachma anya. I won't read the whole thing, but I guess I wanted to throw out to the group here whether, as a lead off to the Magid, does this pose any questions for you?
One question is, what does it mean to be in need? For me, like, what is the nature of that need?
Yeah. Let me ask this to give maybe a little bit more direction, and I not to take away from the validity of the question, because it's a good question, but what struck me, and I think one of the reasons I wanted to do this was that there were some things that kind of hide in plain sight. There's the aspect of this that it's in Aramaic, where virtually all of the Haggadah is in Hebrew. And here is this thing, this opening in Aramaic. So that's one thing that's a little bit curious. And then Roxanne, to go on your thing of need, this is a call to people who are in need to come. And yet it's not happening a week in advance when the invites should be extended. It's happening right at the table. The people you're inviting are not going to hear it. What's the sense of it? So I guess those were two aspects of it I wanted to talk about that are curious, but I think when you spend some time looking at it, you maybe have a little bit of a sense. Just to start on the Aramaic, does anybody want to hazard a guess as to why Aramaic might have been the language for this?
I can hazard the guess, which is Hebrew was no longer the spoken language. So just like the Kaddish is in Aramaic, so would this be? But why? But then that leads to the question, like, why only this, rather than the whole kit and caboodle into the spoken language? And then why did it get codified into Aramaic once it was no longer spoken, except I guess there were some speakers of Aramaic and until in Syria, northern Syria, up till the modern, or Iraq, up till the modern age. So anyway, like,
well, so Claudia, I think it's exactly right. And I think the whole point of this is that if you're making a declaration, an invitation to the world, and you want it to be heard as broadly as possible, you speak in the vernacular, in the lingua franca, which at that time was that people spoke Aramaic. So it's, and in the same way that the Kaddish was supposed to be the most accessible of prayers, it was spoken in the common language. And it's ironic now, 2,000 years later, that for us, it's the most distant and foreign.
Mhm.
Now, the other thing about this, and there's another quote here from the Talmud. Why was the second temple destroyed? You may have heard this before. It was destroyed due to the fact that there was wanton hatred during that period. Sinat chinam, often translated as gratuitous hatred. And again, the destruction of the temple was, I think, very much in the minds of the compilers. And when you go back to Halachma and the central aim of this is gratuitous love. I mean, this is basically all who want to come and who are in need, however that might be defined, come to our table. And even if it is not being issued as an invitation that could seriously be taken, it's being put out as a statement of intent. And that we're here to share our bounty unconditionally. Another thing about the Aramaic is that there's a tradition that the angels do not speak Aramaic. I don't know where that is, but it's in the Talmud. And the point of it is that on this night, we don't need any intermediaries to talk to God, and that we are in direct conversation. Another thing that I've heard about this, Rabbi Sachs and Rabbi Soloveitchik both talk about the ability to share and to have the confidence and the bounty to be able to share is a sign of our freedom. And so it's another thing that's being kind of put out there right up front. Another thing just to talk about, obviously this is pointing to the matzah, and it makes reference, to lachma anya. And by the way, there's a play on words that some of the rabbis say that anya, which is the same, similar to the Hebrew word for answer. This is the bread we spend a lot of time talking over. And matzah is this interesting dual symbol. The dual symbol is both freedom and oppression. It's got two sides. It's got two meanings. And this is happening at the beginning of the Seder, where there is another dual symbol, the karpas, right? Karpas being green, spring, renewal, and yet it's being dipped in the salt water for tears, or in my Sephardic tradition, it was lemon juice. And I guess I'm interested in what people think of the duality, the fact that right up front, we've got this symbol that's got both things embedded in it. And just to make the point, it happens with karpas as well.
Rick,
Yes.
I lost my visual, so I don't know if other people are wanting to speak or not, but I just wanted to mention that there's also something about, this is the bread of affliction, whoops. This is the bread of affliction, and yet, matzah is barely bread, right? I mean, so you need bread, right? Isn't that actually from the Mishnah? Without bread, there is no Torah, right? That's from Pirkei Avot. So if that is the case, what is this bread? This is just barely, right? It's barely bread. And so I think that holds some of that ambivalence. It's that sort of teetering on the balance of what is the minimum. So back to, I think Rat's first question is inherent here too. What is, how much bread is enough? How do we, right? How do we go from bread of affliction to then the next? So I think that all those ambivalences are there right in the beginning, in that first sentence.
Good, thank you. Annette.
I want a couple of things. One, I've always loved the duality.
I'm sorry, I cannot hear you.
Yeah.
You have to unmute. You have to unmute in it.
Oh, I thought I had unmuted. Sorry. I've always loved the duality because that's what life is about. And I love that it recognizes that right away. Life is complicated. And
Yeah.
life is it's more than duality. It's multiply complicated. The other thing I wanted to say about the need is, who was it, Rox, who asked the question about what is the need? There's the physical need, but there's also the emotional need. And I like that, I mean, this is saying, we're gathering you into our community. We're giving you sustenance, but you also are welcome into our community, no matter who you are or where you are. So we don't want you to be out there alone. And maybe I'm reading too much into it, but
No, I think that's very much in it, and it's a lovely sentiment.
But I like that part of it too, and I think about that when I read it. And you know, there is a tradition of inviting strangers or inviting people who don't have a place to go. I don't like that phrase, but I can't come up with a better one at the moment, to make sure that everybody has a place to go for Seder.
Yes.
And be part of a community.
Yeah, thank you. Any other thoughts? Yes, Claudia.
I don't know if this is an answer to your question, but I'm thinking about, you know, the invitation, you know, what does need mean, but also why now? Where else are we enjoined to invite people who can? And it's Shabbat. You know, two loaves of challah, you know, give one away, I think. I don't know where that tradition came from, but Purim, I don't think so. And, you know, Yom Kippur, and, you know, I mean, I'm just sort of running through the different holidays, but it's really this one and Shabbat. But why not? I don't know.
Yeah.
Because we were strangers in a strange land.
Yeah. And that to me is the heart of, I mean, I think the duality is that from our suffering should come our compassion. I mean, that to me that's our origin story, is that we came out as slaves and we should never forget it. And the matzah to me symbolizes that. Yes, Merle.
The invitation is really only to Jewish people. You're not supposed to have people who aren't Jewish at your Seder, which I've always found disturbing. Yeah. There's some rule somewhere in, I don't know where it is.
It's in the Torah that you cannot partake of this Passover sacrifice unless you're circumcised, or, you know, if as a male. I did not know that applies to the Seder. Maybe it
I
does.
thought the opposite.
Yeah, I did
Our
too.
tradition
Particularly in
No,
modern times, I thought we tried to.
I know some people who are quite, ultra religious, and it has caused problems.
Do we
because
believe
a
that as
lot of our
Reconstructionist Jews, Merle?
No, they're not.
Yeah. Well,
It's not something I've ever followed, and I was disturbed to learn that. But what I understood is that according to halacha, somewhere along the line, that Passover is the one time that you should only be among Jews.
yeah.
Meryl, you think maybe that's a halacha that gets debated differently, in other words?
It's not, I
What
mean,
do you think?
I have no idea. I just know that I have very religious friends whose child married somebody that wasn't Jewish and wasn't converted.
Yeah.
And it was a real problem because, do you honor your child or whatever? I don't know what the final result is, but I knew that was a discussion.
Well, I'm going to, let's say we'll have this august body vote that down. And what I'm going to do is move us to a next portion that I wanted to point us to. And that's the Seder of the All-Stars. It happened once on Pesach that Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yehoshua, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Tarfon were reclining in B'nai Brak. They were telling the story of the Exodus from Egypt that whole night until their students came and said to them, "The time of reciting the morning Shema has arrived." So there's a couple of obvious things in here about, it being, praiseworthy to really dig into the Haggadah, spend, all night, et cetera, et cetera. But I wanted to give just a little bit of historical background to this gathering. This Seder, you'll see, it was at Bnei Brak. And Bnei Brak was the yeshiva that Rabbi Akiva founded. And Rabbi Akiva was the greatest scholar of his age. It was said that he had 24,000 students at Bnei Brak. So just a phenomenal kind of number. So he hosted the Seder. And there's a really interesting article about this that Rabbi Jonathan Sachs wrote. That's really fascinating, that I recommend you try to get your hands on. I have it in a book of his on the Seder. And he starts by focusing us on the fact that there are 5 people listed here, and it would be a typical convention that the center person there would almost be sort of the top of the, pardon the use of the word, pyramid for the Passover story, but would be the top of the pyramid. And that's Rab Elazar ben Azariah. And Elazar ben Azariah is going to make an appearance in a little while. It turns out that Elazar ben Azariah's history is that he traced his lineage back to Ezra, who was the scholar who brought the Jews back from Babylonian exile to Jerusalem. And in addition to being an incredibly brilliant scholar from an early age, he was rich and he was also worldly. And Debbie, I thought it was really interesting that you mentioned, if there's no bread, there's no Torah. He is the author of that phrase from Pirkei Avot.
Yeah, I know that.
well-
I know what you're referring to. The Rabbi Sachs's piece.
Yes.
It's
That-
brilliant.
Yeah. Now I'm not going to go through the whole thing, and again, it's really worth reading. But the point of it was that Elazar ben Azariah stepped in as the head of the Sanhedrin when Gamliel was voted out of the Sanhedrin because he was such a caustic personality, a very difficult guy. But as Elazar ben Azariah was a great teacher at a young age, they said, you're going to smooth the rough edges. You're brilliant. Come in and take over. And supposedly they had to add 300 benches to the Sanhedrin because he opened it up to have to the study hall, and he attracted so many students that they had to open up that. Gamliel ultimately made amends and was allowed back in, but Elazar ben Azariah was still allowed to give lectures once a month. It's very interesting also that the Talmud has another parallel story. I'm going to scroll to it right here in Pesachim. It happened that Rabban Gamliel and the elders were once reclining in the house of Beitos ben Zunin in Lud, and they were involved with the laws of Pesach the whole night until the call of the rooster. Their students raised the covering of the window in front of them, and they then convened and went to the house of study. So it's this weird kind of Seder in exile from the Sanhedrin that Rabban Gamliel had. The other thing that is interesting is this notion that these rabbis might actually spend the whole night engaged in discussion of the Exodus and not even realize that it had turned to mourning. And there's one hypothesis that they were, in fact, doing this in hiding because it was perhaps in violation of the Roman edicts against practice of Judaism, and they sort of lost track of the time. While we are talking about Elazar ben Azariah, almost the next thing is this thing from Elazar ben Azariah, Harei ani keven shivim shana, behold, I am like a man of 70 years. I've not merited to understand why the exodus from Egypt should be said at night until Ben Zoma explicated it, as it is stated in Deuteronomy, in order that you shall remember the day of your going out from the land of Egypt all the days of your life. The days of your life indicates the remembrance be invoked during the days. All the days of your life indicates the remembrance be invoked also during the nights. But the sages say the days of your life indicates remembrance invoked in this world. All the days of your life indicates the remembrance be invoked also in the days of the Messiah. So what is this doing here? This seems like a really, I don't know, kind of arcane picayune discussion. So I want to unpack this a little bit. This is a discussion about whether you say the Shema at night. And the reason it's phrased in terms of the Exodus from Egypt should be said at night is because the third paragraph of the Shema is a remembrance of Egypt. And as you may know, because when you pray and you're in that third paragraph of the Shema, you've already gathered the fringes of your talit, right? And you're kissing the fringes at each mention of the word tzitzit. And that's usually the focus that you're thinking of in the third paragraph of the Shema. But the third paragraph of the Shema is also where the remembrance of Yetziat Mitzrayim is. And so what he's saying here is, behold, I am like a man of 70 years. Usually people will say, oh, Elazar ben Azariah got promoted really early to be the head of the Sanhedrin. He was feeling very self-conscious about this precocious promotion. And he prayed that he would be given some gray hair so that he would get some respect. And so that's the reference, behold, I am like a man of 70 years, that God caused his hair to go gray overnight. So that's a kind of a whimsical explanation. But I've read, and I think Erica Brown has a really nice statement of this, that 70 is one of these, numbers that have a lot of significance. Like there were 70 members of the Sanhedrin, 70 faces of the Torah. This was his way of saying, I do have a lot of accumulated knowledge, but I've studied this for what feels like years. I have not merited, meaning, God has not allowed me to understand the biblical source of why the Shema should be said at night. But finally, this guy Ben Zoma, who's like, doesn't even merit a first name, the son of Zoma, we don't even know what his first name is. Ben Zoma explained it. So even though I supposedly have all this knowledge and I've been digging into it, I didn't know the answer, but Ben Zoma explained it. And there's this whole thing of all the days of your life and how to read all. So this is partly a statement of humility and a statement of the kind of need to sort of dig into it, and the Torah and learning. But this second piece, and I'll say when you go to the Hebrew, at the very end here, and I'm circling the vav in front of v'chachamim, that's and, not but, right? And the sages say, so after this whole thing about, well, it's really about saying the Shema at night, it says, and the sages say, not but and, that all the days are this world now, and the days are this world now, all the days are the world to come. And the point of that is that even at the ultimate redemption, when the Messiah comes, you still need to talk about the Exodus from Egypt. It will never be irrelevant. And that to me is, I think, a kind of a beautiful statement of the continuing relevance of remembering, and remembering in a very particular Passover way, because we do talk about the Exodus from Egypt all the time in the Shema. We talk about it in the Shabbat Kiddush. And there are all sorts of reminders of the Exodus from Egypt, but there's something about taking the time to remember, as they say, and to do this in this multi-sensory experience of the Seder that embeds it in us and gives us our source narrative in a much more vivid and visceral way.
It also tells us something about what from generation to generation means,
Yes,
because generation moves beyond, right? It's
Yes.
into the days of the Messiah. I mean, that's such an interesting idea of space and time, right? Where the next generation will be.
yes.
Not here, but yet beyond the future in a way.
Well, and it's interesting because there's a casting forward in the way that you described it, and then there's a casting back
Yeah.
to meet, both this, the notion that we were redeemed from Egypt, but also that, it's obligatory on us to treat ourselves as if we were redeemed from Egypt. So there is definitely a transcending time involved in it.
Generation past, present, and future, right?
Exactly.
I mean, the generations talk to one another, and I think it goes in many different directions. So, and you can feel that. In the Hebrew, is there a way also of combining the past, present, and future in the dikduk, in the grammar?
Within
I don't
this,
see it here. I don't see it here.
yeah, I
but-
don't see it.
But it should,
Unless-
no, I don't see it. I don't
unless
see
the
it.
days are the days,
Mhm, mhm.
and the days kind of run in kind of their order, going back and going forward. Anything else before I go to the next one? Okay, next one. From the beginning, our ancestors were idol worshipers. And now the place of all, I think is a reference to God, has brought us close to, now this is gendered, his worship, sorry. As it is stated, Yoshua said to the whole people, so said the Lord God of Israel, over the river did your ancestors dwell from always. Terach, the father of Abraham and the father of Nachor, and they worshiped other gods. So I don't know if this has ever struck anyone as a little bit curious. Why are we going here? Any thoughts before I go further with it? So in the Talmud, we have a little reference to this here. When teaching his son about the Exodus, he begins with the Jewish people's disgrace and concludes with their glory. And then the rabbis go further to this to say it was taught in the Mishnah that the father begins his answer with disgrace and concludes with glory. The Gemara asks, what is the meaning of the term with disgrace? Rav said that one should begin by saying, at first our forefathers were idol worshippers, before concluding with words of glory. And Shmuel said, the disgrace with which one should begin his answer is, we were slaves. So we have a dispute here between Rav and Shmuel, and they are like Hillel and Shammai. They, were constantly taking different sides on these things, although they were more friendly than Hillel and Shammai, I suspect. But one saying, it should be Avadim Hayinu, and the other should be from the beginning, our forefathers were idol worshipers. Now, the answer is that the Haggadah does both. And this is one where both of these opinions were deemed worthy. And as you know, the Avadim Hayinu is like the first answer to the Magid, the questions, but this is in there as well. So does anybody have any thoughts about this journey of starting with our disgrace and ending in our glory?
I always like that whenever we discussed our beginnings, it's never been like we were the children of an angel that, we don't have this glorious beginning. We don't have, we didn't descend from heaven. Whichever way we were people and we were slaves, we don't see ourselves as descendants of glory. We see ourselves as ascending to glory.
I like that. Thank you. Yes, Claudia.
Yeah, I read somewhere that we are the only people whose origin stories, because everybody has an origin story, but nobody else's starts as slaves. Not. But I don't get that just starting out with disgrace, because for them to have been idol worshipers, why is that a disgrace? Because God hadn't said, who wants me yet. So that was before that. And we were slaves. I don't exactly see that as a disgrace either. It wasn't our idea. We didn't exactly have efficacy over that. So I'm sitting here going, huh?
I hear you, and that's a point well taken. And I think disgrace, genut, is not necessarily disgrace, but it's kind of a low point. So it's maybe not the greatest
Okay, thank you.
translation, but start from their low point. So this is,
Got it. Thank you.
Jews,
That helps.
Jews in the writer's room, and they know how to tell a story. So we're gonna, do the Horatio Alger thing, start humble, end big.
Okay, thank you. That helps.
Yeah.
And then get humbled again, right?
Yeah.
And start again.
Yes.
Yeah.
You can get a few seasons out of that series.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I do think that it's of a piece with, let's say, Dayenu telling the pinnacle of the deliverance story ends not with our freedom, but with getting the Torah and building the Beit HaMikdash. And that the true journey here wasn't completed until the Jews get the Torah on Mount Sinai. And while I don't think, it's in Dayenu, I don't know that it's necessarily where else that is in the Haggadah, but the theological point that's being made by, and I forget who took which side between Rav and Shmuel, was that the ultimate story here is being, becoming the, God's nation. Certainly the kids will hook into the, the slavery narrative, and maybe for slightly older people, it's more about becoming God's nation. So I wanted to go to the next thing. And I think before I do any screen sharing, I think no discussion of the Seder would be complete without discussing the four sons, because talk about gendered, but also pigeonholing our children. And, I find it a very, very difficult text. And I think it begs for, reinterpretation. And I'm going to get into kind of a narrow point of it, but I wanted to start off by asking people, have they found an interesting way to frame the four sons that feels better than the stereotyping, kind of straightforward reading of it that can be difficult?
I'm looking at PJ Library's Haggadah for the Family, which we have never used, but I support PJ. So I wanted to see, I haven't looked at it, but wanted to see how they dealt with it. What I think is really interesting is how they deal with the plagues, but which is to use it as sorrow for all the plagues that happened to the Egyptians.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a totally different take on the plagues in that way. I'm just looking to see how they handle the four sons.
Well, while you're looking, does anyone have a reframing of it? I'll throw out a couple I've run into, but I'm wondering how you think about it, or do you just look at it and suffer through it? Yes, Roxanne.
I think one of my favorites is that we are all of the children all of the time. So that it's not individuals, but that we have those characteristics within us.
Yes, thank you. That's lovely, and I think that's both true and helpful. So it has two things going for it.
Yeah.
Any other?
The Haggadah, the PJ Haggadah uses the idea that we are different, we are all so different, and we learn differently, and we ask different kinds of questions. And it's much more in the sense of meeting the diverse needs rather than comparing each to the other, and they named them wise, rebellious, simple, and quiet.
Yeah.
Which I think is a rather interesting sort of approach to it.
Yes, I like rebellious better than evil or
Yeah.
bad. And it,
Right,
I think
right.
Rabbi Sachs has it's a slight variation. Roxanne, you say all of these all of the time. And Rabbi Sachs talks about perhaps they're developmental in some way. And he thinks about the rebellious one as the adolescent, for example. And it doesn't perfectly map, but another way to at least incorporate within ourselves these four things as opposed to otherizing. Yes, Merle.
I was thinking about how different Jews now celebrate Pesach. It is the holiday that it has got most Jews. It's the one that that is celebrated by more Jews than any other, but it's done differently. There are those who will just, daven the Haggadah. There are those that sit and talk about it. There's those that you have a family dinner that doesn't read the Haggadah at all and doesn't reply. Like we have all these, different. We're reinterpreting, and in some ways, that's the way I would look at the idea that you can approach the Passover in many different ways. The one that got me the most now, I have friends who will have a Passover Seder, but not necessarily on Passover, when it's convenient to get all the family together. So it's, if it comes on a Tuesday, God forbid, and they have children living in 3 different places, you can't get them together. So you have it either the previous or the following weekend. But it's still recognizing that they're Jews and getting together and having a different kind of meal than you'd have at any other time.
Yep. That flexibility makes sense to me, but I'm not exactly doctrinaire on these things. Thank you, Merle. Any other thoughts before I dig into a little bit of specifics?
Well, I just wanted to note once again to the PJ Seder, how they refer to the rebellious child challenges. What does all this mean to you? The rebellious child feels like an outsider to this Seder. And another rather interesting way.
And even more law.
Pardon?
Yeah.
I didn't hear.
Go ahead, Merle, repeat that.
I was just repeating an evil law. If he wouldn't have been redeemed because
Right.
it didn't.
Right.
Yeah, he's self-excluding. Yeah, I mean, within my family, so I've got my own kind of traumas over this thing because my parents typecast the kids in our family. So I had a brother who was always the evil one. Fortunately, I was not that one, but it just was a really awful, fraught way to, it was sort of like if Bergman did a film about the Seder, it would have been, our family. But anyway.
How'd your brother deal with the scars of that in his adult life?
Yeah, I know, exactly. That's a whole nother thing.
Well, I just want to offer a different take on that.
Yeah.
I had a cousin who was the evil and he loved it. He saw himself as the star of the evening, and I'm sure brought together all the different things. He was rebellious, and he loved it, and he would almost put a cape on, to say it.
That's great.
Sorry, I didn't mean to change.
No, I love it. You might as well lean into it. All right, we're gonna go to the wise child. So what does the wise son say? What are these testimonies, statutes, judgments that the Lord God commanded you? Direct quote from the Torah. And accordingly, you will say to him, as per the laws of the Pesach sacrifice, we may not eat an Afikomen, which is a dessert or other foods eaten after the meal, after we have finished eating the Pesach sacrifice. So I don't know about you, but for me, I don't know what to make of that answer, or at least I didn't when I first read it. I mean, it's a bizarre answer to the question. It's almost like a non sequitur. So I wanted to talk about the tradition. So the reason this is an answer is that if you go to the Talmud, literally the last section that has a substantive law in the Talmud is the law of the Afikomen, that basically says you don't, eat anything after the Pesach sacrifice, and the Afikomen is said to sort of stand in for it. You don't do anything else, no more eating. You can do a little more drinking. So they had their priorities straight, but no more eating. And this is a way of saying, you asked me about the law, I'll give you the law from beginning to end. And that this is the elusive way of saying, just give them all of the law. Now, two things I wanted to talk about related to the Afikomen. So there's a lot of dispute about the etymology of Afikomen, but I think the better view, based on the reading that I've done, is that in the same way that the Seder is a symposium, the Greek drinking party, another Greek custom was, after your drinking party was done, you went to another one and you kind of pub hopped to someone else's party. And Afikomen is the after party. That's what that means. And it was basically saying, yeah, we're going to borrow one Greek custom, but we're not borrowing that other one. No Afikomen. And the thing that I wanted to share was a really lovely thing that I had read on the meaning of the Afikomen by this Rabbi Helen Plotkin. And it goes on a little bit, and if you don't mind, I'm going to read it because I thought it was a really nice framing of the Afikomen. If you ask a Jewish kid to name the best part of the Passover Seder, chances are they'll answer the Afikomen. It's one of the final rituals of the long evening, coming at the end of the Seder meal, and it tends to involve presents for the children. This custom gives the children something to look forward to, and the anticipation helps them stay awake. But there's more to it than that. And I'm assuming everybody here grew up in a household where the Afikomen was hid and the kids found it and got, some sort of prize for finding it, right? The Seder unfolds between two halves of a broken matzah. At the beginning, we hold up a stack of 3 matzahs. We take out the middle one and break it in half. Matzahs never break exactly in half. We put the smaller piece back into the middle of the stack. We wrap up the larger piece in the napkin, put it aside to distribute amongst the guests as the very last bite of the Seder meal, the Afikomen. Another etymology is dessert. The various Afikomen customs in different Jewish communities share a common theme. It's the children who have the job of delivering the second half of the middle matzah to the table at the end of the Seder. The bottom matzah represents the earthly realm. The top is the heavenly realm. So below, pure physicality; above, pure spirit. The middle matzah represents the human story, straddling above and below. The role of humans is to become the bridge, bringing holiness down into the nitty-gritty stuff of life, and at the same time elevating the mundane so that it takes on spiritual meaning. We focus on the middle matzah representing the human situation. The middle matzah is broken. We put aside the larger half. What remains is small and ragged. We call it lachma anya, the bread of affliction, the bread of impoverishment and enslavement. We begin the Seder by recognizing that, like the Israelites in Egypt, our need for redemption is great. The world that we inhabit is broken, incomplete, full of suffering and despair. With our first bite of the middle matzah, we internalize this truth. Like the Israelites at the first Seder, we are in a place of brokenness, and like them, we are standing in the doorway. We are setting out on a journey. In the central section of the Haggadah, called Magid, telling, we relate the story of a people once confined, held back, going nowhere, stuck in bricks and mortar, now transformed into a nation on its way with a vision of a promised land. Still in the wilderness, we eat our dinner. As we approach the end of the Seder, we come to the section in which we find and eat the Afikomen, the section called Tzafun, which means hidden or stored away. The implication is that the Afikomen represents something inaccessible, something not available to us in our everyday lives, complete and ultimate freedom, true redemption. Sated with family, learning, laughter, and food, we finally act out the repair of our broken world. When we eat the Afikomen, the broken pieces of the human realm will get put back together. They will recombine inside us. They will become us. The bridge between heaven and earth will be repaired. And this is the secret of the Afikomen ritual. Whom must we trust to bring the other half? The children. In the end, the most important piece, the point of it all, the future, our own redemption is in the hands of the younger generation. We have no choice but to trust them to bring it to the table. So that goes back to the generations, Debbie, that you were talking about.
Who wrote that again, Rich?
It is Rabbi Helen Plotkin.
I must leave. I'm having a terrible reaction. My eyes are I'm very allergic, and I'm going to have to go do something about it. But thank you so much. Thank you all. And Chag Sameach.
Yes, no, Chag Sameach. I wish you all a really wonderful holiday with friends and family, and thank you for joining us. Chag Sameach. Does anybody have any concluding thoughts? I don't want to, to terminate this too abruptly.
Just thank you very much, Rich. This has been really wonderful and fruitful and helpful.
Yeah. Oh, good. I'm glad.
Thank you, Rich.
That was
Thank you.
great.
Thank you, Rich.
Very interesting.
Been great.
Yeah.
Thanks so much.
Great. Lovely. Chag Sameach, everybody.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, Rich. That was really great.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Nancy.
Great to
Thanks
think
for
that.
joining.
Yeah, of course.
See you.